My mother kept a ceramic rooster on the kitchen windowsill for as long as I can remember. It was chipped on one side from the time my brother knocked it off the counter when he was 8 and then lied about it for 11 years. She never threw it away. She said every crack in something you love is just proof it survived. I thought about that rooster a lot in the weeks after she died. She passed on a Wednesday in late October, which is the kind of detail you don't think you'll remember but do. The hospice nurse had been coming every other day for about 3 weeks by then, and I had taken leave from my job to stay at the house with her. I work in financial compliance. I audit accounts, track discrepancies, catch things that don't add up, and I had enough saved to cover a few months away from the office. It wasn't even a question for me. She was my mother. Of course I went. My brother did not go. He lived 4 hours away and had a job he described as being in between opportunities, which as far as I could tell meant he spent most of his time watching sports and asking his wife to cover things. They had 2 kids, a house they'd refinanced twice, and a pattern of financial decisions that I had watched for years, with the particular exhaustion of someone who understands exactly what the numbers mean. I'm not saying I'm better than him. I'm saying I understood the situation clearly and chose not to look away from it. When my mother was first admitted to hospice, I called him. He said he'd come when he could. I called again 2 weeks later. He said work was complicated. I didn't ask which job. I just said, okay, I'll keep you updated. And I kept updating him. And he kept saying he was trying to get there. And my mother kept asking me quietly if I thought he would come before the end. She said it without bitterness. That was the part that was hard to sit with. She wasn't angry at him. She was just asking. He arrived 4 hours after she died. I don't know if he planned it that way. I'm not sure it matters. He walked in while I was still at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee in front of me, and the hospice nurse had already left, and the house was so quiet you could hear the refrigerator humming. He hugged me. He smelled like coffee and stale air from a long drive. He said, "I'm so sorry. I got here as fast as I could." I nodded. I didn't say anything. That night, the 3 of us, my brother, his wife, and I sat in the living room and talked about arrangements. I had already spoken with the funeral home. I had already called the attorney's office. I had already contacted the insurance company because my mother had asked me to handle those things 6 months ago when she was first diagnosed, and I had done it quietly and carefully and without making a production of it. My brother didn't know that last part yet. What he did know was that our mother had a life insurance policy. She had mentioned it to both of us at different points over the years. $200,000 paid out to whoever she named as beneficiary. She had also mentioned less specifically, but enough that she had savings. The house was paid off. There was money in a checking account and a separate CD account she'd been building since we were kids. I watched my brother do the math in his head while we sat in that living room. I've spent years reading financial documents, and I know what it looks like when someone is calculating. He asked about the funeral costs. Reasonable question. Then he asked how much was left in her checking account, because he wanted to make sure we could cover everything without going into debt. Also reasonable, on its face. Then he asked, almost offhandedly, whether she'd updated the beneficiary on the life insurance recently. That was the question. I said I wasn't sure, and we'd find out when everything was processed. He nodded. His wife looked at her phone. I looked at the ceramic rooster on the windowsill and thought about the crack in its side. The funeral was that Friday. There was a lot to coordinate: the service, the flowers, the obituary, which turns out to require more decisions than you would expect. I handled most of it. My brother came to the planning meeting at the funeral home but stepped out twice to take calls, and when I asked about it later, he said it was about a job lead he was following up on. I didn't say anything to that either. The night before the service, I stayed up late going through paperwork at the kitchen table. My mother had kept everything organized in a green accordion folder in her closet, and I had been working through it methodically. She was that kind of person, everything labeled, everything dated. I had found the insurance documents weeks earlier, back when she first asked me to start getting things in order. I had called the insurance company then. I had asked them to confirm the beneficiary on file. It was me. She had updated it 4 years ago and hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I sat with that for a while when I first found out. It wasn't something I expected, and I wasn't sure what to do with the feeling of it, the weight of being trusted, that completely, the responsibility of it. I called the insurance company back the next day to make sure I understood the process. I called the bank where she kept her accounts. I spoke with the attorney's office about the will. I wasn't doing any of this to position myself or to cut anyone out. I was doing it because someone had to, and because my mother had asked me to, and because that's what I do. What I didn't know yet was that my brother had also been making calls. I found out from his wife. The night before the funeral, she came into the kitchen while I was still at the table. I had always been somewhat neutral on my sister-in-law. She wasn't unkind, but she had a way of deferring to my brother on everything that I found difficult to watch. She poured herself a glass of water and then stood at the counter for a moment and then said, carefully, I just want you to know that whatever happens with the estate, I hope it doesn't come between you two. I looked up from the folder. She said, he's been really stressed about everything, and I think he's maybe made some calls he shouldn't have. I asked her what kind of calls. She said she didn't know the details, and I believed her, because I think she genuinely didn't. She just knew something was happening, and it made her uncomfortable enough to give me that much of a warning. I thanked her. She went to bed. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour. In the morning, I called the insurance company before I got dressed for the service. The representative confirmed what I already knew: the beneficiary was me. The claim had been initiated. The processing time was standard. I asked if anyone else had contacted them about the policy. There was a pause. She said she couldn't discuss account activity with anyone other than the named beneficiary, which told me what I needed to know. I got dressed. I went to the funeral. I stood beside my mother's casket and shook hands with people who had known her for 30 years and listened to the pastor talk about her and held it together until the drive home, when I cried in the parking lot of a gas station for about 12 minutes and then put the car in drive. My brother left the day after the service. He said he had things he needed to get back to, and I understood that to be true in more ways than he meant. He hugged me again at the door and said to call if I needed anything, and I said I would, and we both performed the version of things where everything was normal. His wife gave me a look over his shoulder that I didn't fully interpret until later. For the next week, I stayed at the house, went through more paperwork, and spoke with the attorney about the will. The will was simple. The house went to both of us equally. The personal belongings were divided with some specificity. She had thought about it carefully, which was so like her. The financial accounts were not mentioned in the will because she had handled those separately through beneficiary designations and account titling. The insurance policy paid out to me. One of the bank accounts, the CD, had been set up as payable on death to me, again something she had done quietly and deliberately years ago. The attorney explained all of this to me in a measured, professional way and then said, I want to make sure you understand your position clearly, because I expect you may receive some pressure. I said I understood. He said, call me if you do. I did receive pressure. It started about 10 days after the service, when my brother called and asked how the estate settlement was going. I told him the will was straightforward and the house would be handled through probate. He asked about the insurance. I told him it had been paid out to the named beneficiary. He was quiet for a moment and then said, she told me she was going to split it. I said I didn't know what she had told him, but the legal document named one beneficiary. He said, that doesn't seem fair. I said I was sorry he felt that way. He said, you were always her favorite. You know that, right? You were always the one she trusted more, and it was never equal, and now this. I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that would have helped anything. He called back the next day and asked if I would consider splitting the insurance money voluntarily. I said I needed to think about it. He called again 2 days after that and said he was in a difficult financial position and that the timing of this had really put him and his wife in a hard spot. I said I was sorry about his situation. He said, I need you to actually help me, not just say you're sorry. I said I would call him back. What happened instead was that I started getting emails. Not from my brother, from his wife's email address, which I assume he was using because he thought I'd be more likely to engage. The emails asked about the estate timeline, about the house, about whether I had received any insurance funds and when they would be distributed. The last email said that if I wasn't willing to work with him, he had spoken with someone who said he might have grounds to contest. I forwarded those to the attorney. And then something else happened. I got a call from the bank where my mother kept her checking account. A fraud alert had been triggered. Someone had called the bank 2 days earlier, attempting to update the account contact information and request a statement of account balance. They had used my mother's social security number and date of birth. The bank had flagged it because the caller couldn't answer the security questions correctly. The woman from the fraud department read me the phone number the call had originated from. It was my brother's cell phone. I sat very still for a moment. Then I said, what happens next? She explained the process. Because it was flagged as potential fraud on a deceased account holder, they were required to document it and could escalate if I wished to file a report. I said I needed to think about it and would call back. I hung up and called the attorney and told him everything. He said quietly, you understand what this is, right? I said yes. He said, what do you want to do? I thought about my mother asking me, in that careful way she had, whether I thought my brother would come before the end. I thought about the ceramic rooster with the crack in its side. I thought about the green accordion folder she kept so organized, and the 4 years she spent not telling either of us that she had updated that beneficiary designation and what it meant that she had done it and stayed quiet about it. I said, I want to handle it correctly. The attorney said that was the right answer. About 3 weeks after the funeral, my brother called to tell me he and his wife were taking a trip. He said it in the casual way people mention things when they want you to know without wanting to have a conversation about it. He said they had been going through a hard time and they needed a reset. He said a friend had offered them a deal on a place in Scottsdale. He called it a long weekend. I said that sounded nice. He said he'd check in when they got back and we could figure out the house situation then. I said, okay. What I knew, and he didn't know I knew, was that 6 days earlier his wife's credit card, the one she had opened in her name, but that he had been the primary user of, had been used to book 4 nights at a resort in Scottsdale, Arizona. I knew this because she had called me, not to report it exactly, just to tell me, in that indirect way she communicated difficult things, that he had taken what he called a loan he was expecting and booked the trip before telling her, and that she was uncomfortable and she didn't know what to do. She said the amount was significant. I asked how significant. She paused and then said, he told me the insurance money was going to be split and he just needed to front the cash for a few weeks. I said I hadn't agreed to that. The line was quiet. I said, how much did he spend? She told me. It was a number that made my stomach turn not because of the amount alone, but because of the arithmetic of it. That was his mortgage for 3 months. That was what he owed on the car loan that was already past due. That was what his kids' school fees cost for a semester. And he had booked a resort in Scottsdale instead. His wife was crying by the end of the call. I asked if she was okay. She said she didn't know. I said I was sorry she was in this position and I meant it. I called the attorney the next morning. He walked me through the documentation we had already assembled, the fraud alert from the bank, the emails from his wife's account, the call records, the timeline. He said that depending on what I wanted to pursue, there were several options. He said the most important thing right now was to make sure all the assets I was legally entitled to were protected and inaccessible to anyone acting without authorization. I said they already were. I had moved everything within 2 weeks of my mother's passing, transferred, retitled, secured. My mother's attorney had helped me start that process even before she died, when it became clear the end was close. I hadn't done it to be strategic. I had done it because she asked me to, because she said she wanted to make sure things went to the right places and didn't get complicated. She was a practical woman. She had thought about this carefully. She just hadn't told my brother she was thinking about it at all. He called me from Scottsdale on the 3rd day of the trip. I could tell from the sound in the background that he was somewhere loud, poolside maybe, or a bar. He asked how I was doing and I said fine, and then he asked whether the insurance money had cleared into any accounts yet because he had some timing things he was working out. I said the insurance had been processed. He said, great, so when can we talk about how we're dividing it? I said, I don't think we're dividing it. The background noise didn't change. He said, what does that mean? I said, Mom named one beneficiary. The insurance company paid out accordingly. That's how it works. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she told me she was going to split it equally. I said, I know you believe that. He said, so you're just keeping it. I said, I'm handling it the way she set it up. His voice changed. It got flatter, tighter, the way it used to when we were kids and he was losing an argument he didn't want to lose. He said, you've always done this. You've always positioned yourself as the responsible one and made me look bad, and this is just more of the same. I didn't say what I could have said. I didn't mention the bank fraud alert. I didn't mention the emails. I didn't mention the phone number the representative had read me. I just said, I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm trying to handle things correctly. He said he was going to talk to someone about his options. I said, okay. He hung up. I sat in my mother's kitchen with my hands around a mug of coffee and looked at the ceramic rooster on the windowsill. The afternoon light came through at an angle and lit up the crack on its side in a way I hadn't noticed before. You could see exactly where it had broken and exactly where it had held. His wife called me that evening. She wasn't crying this time. She sounded very tired and very clear. She said the resort had put a hold on the room charges when the credit card flagged an irregularity, and she had called the credit card company from the airport 3 days earlier and flagged the transaction herself because she hadn't authorized it. She said when they tried to check out, the card declined. She said my brother had tried 3 other cards, all of which were also declined, and she had stood in the lobby of a resort in Scottsdale while her husband argued with a front desk employee for 25 minutes. She said, "I just thought you should know what happened." I asked if she and the kids were okay. She said she had paid for the room herself, from her own account, the one she had kept separate. She said she had also called her sister, who was a family law attorney. I said, "I'm glad you have someone to talk to." She said, "I've been glad about that for a while." We stayed on the phone for a few minutes longer. She asked if I was going to pursue anything formally the bank incident, the emails. I told her I hadn't decided yet, that I was following the attorney's guidance, and that whatever I did would be about doing things correctly, not about hurting her or the kids. She said she understood and she appreciated that. After she hung up, I called the attorney and told him what had happened. He said the credit card company flag, combined with the documented bank fraud attempt, created a clearer picture. He said the decision about whether to involve law enforcement was mine. He said whatever I decided, I should make it deliberately and not out of anger. I thought about it for 2 days. What I kept coming back to was not the money, and not the trip, and not even the phone call where I could hear the resort sounds in the background while he asked me about splitting the insurance. What I kept coming back to was the question my mother had asked me carefully, quietly, without bitterness, whether I thought he would come before the end. She had been protecting me from that answer for years. She had updated the beneficiary designation and not said a word. She had worked with the attorney to structure things clearly and not said a word. She had watched her son not come for weeks, not come until after, and she had not once said anything to me about it except that one question. She wasn't asking because she was angry. She was asking because she was still hoping. I think she also knew the answer. In the end, I filed a report with the bank. The bank escalated it according to their procedures for deceased account fraud. I did not file a separate police report. The attorney said the bank's filing would create a record that could be referenced if anything further happened, and that was enough for now. My brother was notified. He called me once after that. I didn't answer. He sent a text that said he hoped we could work things out, and I replied that I hoped so too and left it there. The house went through probate over the following months. We were required to make joint decisions about it, which we did through the attorneys, without speaking directly. It sold in February, a few months later. The proceeds were split. That was straightforward because it was in the will. His wife moved out in January. She took the kids and went to her sister's place in another state. I know this because she texted me when she left. She said she wanted me to know that she didn't blame me for anything, and that she was okay, and that the kids were okay. I told her I was glad. I meant it. I stayed at my mother's house through the end of November, finishing up the last of the paperwork, and the small tasks that needed doing, donating her clothes, sorting her books, deciding what to keep. I kept the ceramic rooster. I wrapped it carefully and put it in my car and drove it back to my apartment, and now it sits on my kitchen windowsill where I can see it from the table. There are people who ask why I didn't just split the money. They ask it the way people ask questions when they've already decided what the right answer should have been. I understand the impulse. It's neater. It fits the version of fairness where everyone gets equal shares regardless of what happened. What I think about is my mother. I think about the fact that she had years to make a different choice, and she didn't. She thought about it, she clearly thought about it, and she made the decision she made carefully and deliberately and without telling either of us. She was not a careless person. She was not confused. She knew what she was doing. I think she was also telling me something about what she saw and what she had decided, and that the truest way I could honor her was to trust that she had meant what she set up. The life insurance money is sitting in a dedicated account. I haven't touched most of it. I'm not sure exactly what I'll do with it yet. Part of me thinks about buying something that lasts property or something else she would have approved of. Part of me thinks I'll know when the time is right. What I do know is this. I spent 3 weeks sleeping in my mother's house and making decisions and handling paperwork and taking calls and coordinating arrangements and answering questions and staying steady when it would have been easier not to. I did that not because I wanted recognition for it and not because I was positioning myself for anything. I did it because she needed someone to, and I was the person who was there. She saw that. She'd been seeing it for a long time. She just showed me the receipts at the end. My brother sent me a message last month. Short, no preamble, just, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I want to apologize. I handled things badly. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it for a few days, the way you sit with things that are complicated and real and don't fit cleanly into any category. I wrote back eventually. I said I appreciated him saying that. I said I hoped he was doing okay. I said I wasn't sure what our relationship looks like going forward, but that I wasn't closed to figuring it out. He hasn't replied yet. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Either way, the rooster is on my windowsill. It has a crack down one side from a lie that lasted 11 years, and my mother kept it on hers for 30, and now it's on mine. Every crack in something you love is just proof it survived. I'm not sure what we are to each other now, my brother and I. I'm not sure what the word family means when you've been through something like this and come out the other side of it changed. I know I still have his number in my phone. I know I still think about his kids and hope they're all right. I know that grief does strange things to people, and that financial pressure does strange things to people, and that I am not without understanding of how someone gets to where he got. I also know what my mother knew, which is that understanding something and accepting it are not the same thing, and that you can love someone and still choose clearly. She taught me that without ever saying it directly. She was that kind of person. Everything labeled, everything considered, every decision made on purpose, including the ones she made quietly, in the background, without making a production of it. I try to be like that. I don't always manage it, but I try. And the rooster stays on the windowsill, crack and all, because some things you keep not in spite of what happened to them, but because of it.